Well, good morning and welcome everyone again. Hello from Nigeria. Yes. So thank you so much and for joining Drawdown Lift's background briefing on solutions at the nexus of climate and development in African and South Asian countries. I'm Debbie Din, and I'm a member of Drawdown Lift's Advisory Council, and I'll be your moderator for today's briefing. Project Drawdown researches and disseminates knowledge about climate solutions. And Drawdown Lift in particular researches climate solutions that specifically have multiple co-benefits, solutions that do double duty in mitigating climate change, as well as boosting human well-being, resilience, and reducing poverty in rural communities. So Drawdown Lift has organized this briefing today because we want to make this important data on climate solutions more accessible to journalists like you. As you know, on the climate front, it's a critical time, and many people are asking, now that we've gotten global agreements and have made commitments to reverse climate change, how do we actually make this happen on the ground? And how do we now move from discussion and negotiations to implementation, finance, and action? And what kinds of climate action are required? And in particular, more importantly, how do we have climate action that is positive for communities experiencing deep poverty and inequality? So we know that efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change, well, number one, need to be scaled up rapidly, and two, they need to be locally led. And there's strong evidence that climate and poverty reduction can be addressed simultaneously. We don't have to choose one over the other. So this is why the kind of data Lift provides is critical to support local efforts in the push for win-win solutions. I'm also co-founder of Proximity Designs and lead a social business helping hundreds of thousands of farm families in Myanmar to increase their yields and farm incomes. And the Lift research and knowledge has particularly helped us to focus on practical solutions that do double duty in helping farmers with their yields, soils, and profits, as well as sequester carbon in the soil. And it turns out we're learning that what's good for farmers and soils is also good for our planet. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. This briefing will last about 45 minutes, and we'll have a 20-minute presentation by Dan Jasper from the Lift team about their landmark report published last year. And afterwards, we'll have a period for questions from you, our audience. And you can submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button and instead of the raise hand button or using the chat. Please use the Q&A function. We'd like to leave the chat for general discussions and comments. We've enabled closed captions for you, and you can turn those on at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be recording this briefing and are happy to send you a copy afterwards. However, it will not be made public. Lastly, there'll be a short survey at the end of the webinar, and please give us your feedback so we can continue to improve on these kinds of events. And now on with our program. I'll hand it over to Dan, who can dive into his presentation. Dan?
Yeah, thanks so much, Debbie. I really appreciate that introduction. Wonderful to see all of our attendees. We know all of you are super busy, so we are deeply grateful for your time here today, and we are going to do our best to make sure that it is worth your time. I was really glad to connect with many of you one-on-one, but I'm not entirely sure. I see some new names here, so I'm not entirely sure who we have on board. So I'm going to share just a quick poll so that we get a sense of who's with us today. And okay, hopefully you can see that on your screen. And I'll just give it a few seconds here while I get set up here. If you could drop in your answers. Okay, wonderful. I see some answers coming in here. Great. Okay, I think we're hitting close to critical mass here. I am going to go ahead and close the poll here. So it looks like, share the results. Wonderful. So I see a lot of folks from Africa and Asia. That's wonderful. This is obviously geared towards those regions. So wonderful to have you with us. And then I see, okay, a pretty good mix of various platforms, a lot online. I think that's probably a result of the times we live in, but good to know there's a mix. Wonderful. We really appreciate all of your attendance. Good to know who's with us. So hopefully you can see my screen here. And I just want to quickly dive into the first question here. You may be wondering, why are we holding this briefing? There are a few things that prompted us. The first is that we are at an inflection point. There are several developments in the climate field that are all happening at once. So for instance, we have commitments to establish a loss and damage fund. We hear increasing calls for the World Bank reform, and we are in the midst of the global stocktake, which will measure progress toward the Paris Agreement and be a key point of discussion at COP28. At the same time, though, we noticed a lack of solutions-oriented data, and we wanted to help try to fill that gap. We recently heard the head of the US Treasury remark that one of her takeaways from her trip to Africa was that global challenges, i.e. climate change, shouldn't be addressed at the expense of poverty alleviation. And that leads me to what we are discussing today. Last year, we launched a landmark report outlining climate solutions that have proven co-benefits for poverty alleviation and human well-being. So given the moment, we believe this data is more important than ever and is really valuable for making links between climate impacts and locally led solutions. And it is especially important for reporters like yourselves who are connecting local issues to the global crisis every day. So our agenda for the rest of the show here will be to just a quick brief overview of Project Drawdown. We'll talk about the report I just mentioned, the Climate Poverty Connections report, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And there should be plenty of time for questions, and we're really curious to hear from you. Okay, so Project Drawdown is a small US-based nonprofit focused on climate solutions and strategies. Our mission is to help the world reach drawdown as quickly and safely and equitably as possible. In case the term drawdown is new to some of you, it refers to the future point in time when levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere stop climbing and steadily start declining. It's what the world needs, as evidenced by the near weekly climate magnifying disasters we are now seeing around the world, from the devastating floods in Pakistan and Nigeria to the ongoing drought in Madagascar, all of which have terrible and cascading implications for their local communities. So Project Drawdown has identified 93 climate solutions to address climate change, the details of which you can find on our website at drawdown.org. I really encourage you to check it out. It's really interesting to check out all these solutions. The solutions are all interconnected, and we need all of them to reach drawdown. So Project Drawdown solutions are global in scope, and they are 1, currently available, 2, financially viable, 3, have proven potential to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and 4, have sufficient data available to model the level of greenhouse gases that can be mitigated, reduced, or sequestered. So Project Drawdown Solutions addresses greenhouse gas emissions from each of these sectors. We recognize that rich countries need to continue to decarbonize rapidly, and that renewable energy needs to be massively scaled up, both in rich countries and around the world in low and middle income countries. So as we know, climate change touches all aspects of our lives, as well as the health of the planet. Project Drawdown's framework recognizes that major systemic change is required to reach drawdown. So how do we do that? First, we can reduce the sources of greenhouse gases through solutions that focus on shifting to renewable electricity, increasing energy efficiency, reducing food waste and loss, and shifting diets. Second, we can support and enhance the sinks of carbon dioxide found in nature on land and sea by improving agriculture and agroforestry practices and protecting and restoring ecosystems. Finally, we can address inequities in society through people-centered solutions like meeting everyone's desired family planning needs and ensuring access to universal high-quality education. So taken together, these are the three connected areas that the drawdown framework for climate solutions is needed for individuals, companies, and governments, and that they must pursue at a global scale. A linear focus on either poverty or climate change, however, isn't enough to effectively address the magnitude of the dual crises. Climate change and poverty are inextricably linked. People living in extreme poverty, particularly women and children, are more vulnerable to natural disasters and commonly live in regions that have been and are projected to be most impacted by climate change. 850 million people still cook using solid fuels like wood, charcoal, and crop residues to cook meals, and they suffer from the resulting household air pollution, particularly women and children. Almost 600 people across Africa still don't have access to electricity. So we need a holistic framework to address climate and poverty more synergistically. So Drawdown's Lift Climate Poverty Connections report, which we launched last year and which I mentioned at the top of the presentation, summarizes the evidence around the well-being benefits of 28 climate solutions with a focus on communities in Africa and South Asia. We recognize that people in these communities are often first and worst impacted by climate change, yet have contributed the least to the problem. So for example, Africa's emissions are less than 4% of total global emissions to date. While the solutions included in Project Drawdown's overall framework focus on reducing emissions, the subset of solutions included in the Climate Poverty Connections report all have multiple co-benefits for climate mitigation, adaptation, and well-being, and are a means for emerging economies to pursue renewable, low-carbon development pathways while addressing the socioeconomic needs of their populations. So again, we identified a subset of 28 Project Drawdown solutions that generate significant co-benefits for poverty reduction and overall well-being. They're shown in the colored bubbles here. The gray bubbles represent other Project Drawdown solutions that are not included in the report. So we group solutions with similar human well-being co-benefits together. So for example, tropical and temperate forest restoration and protection, grassland protection, coastal wetland protection and restoration, peatland protection and rewetting, and indigenous peoples forest tenure have similar co-benefits and are grouped together in brown in solutions focused on protecting and restoring ecosystems right here. So our report focuses on 5 groups of solutions: improving agriculture and agroforestry, right here, protecting and restoring ecosystems, which I just mentioned, fostering equality, providing clean electricity, and adopting clean cooking. So the next step in our work was to evaluate the evidence for the 5 climate solution groups on improving 12 different dimensions of human well-being. And we can get into those dimensions of human well-being in the question and answer period if you're curious. We reviewed over 450 reports and peer-reviewed articles to identify and summarize the evidence for human well-being benefits. Small footnote here, I will note that I say we, but actually I mean my colleagues. I was brought on after the report was launched, so I want to give credit where credit is due. We do have most of the authors with us for the Q&A though. Okay, so the left side of the figure over here shows the 5 climate solution groups. And then the second column shows each solutions group potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions between 2020 and 2050 at a global level. So for instance, the Protecting and Restoring Ecosystem Solutions Group has an emission reduction potential of 181.5 gigatons right here. And then on the right side of the figure, using teal and gray icons, we list all the human well-being dimension benefits generated by each climate solution group. The direct benefits are in teal and the indirect benefits are in gray. Okay, so for example, adopting clean cooking in the purple bubble directly contributes to decreasing energy poverty, and it indirectly contributes to increasing in income, better health, improved gender equality, and better education. So right away, we can see that properly designed and implemented policies for low carbon and resilient growth can also help address poverty and inequality, enabling people to live safer, more prosperous, more inclusive, and more sustainable lives. There don't have to be trade-offs between achieving the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals and climate action. Okay, so I just want to highlight one group to give you an idea of how to read the data. The first group of solutions listed is improving agriculture and agroforestry. So changing the way we grow food is critical to addressing climate change and eliminating hunger and poverty. In 2020, more than 2.3 billion people, 1/3 of the global population, experienced moderate or severe food insecurity. Global food insecurity among women is 10% higher than men. And as you know, the war in Ukraine has further increased food insecurity in many African countries that are dependent on wheat and fertilizer inputs from Ukraine. In Africa, 21% of the population experiences undernourishment, while in Asia, 9% of the population is undernourished. And the World Bank economists estimated that improvements in agriculture are 11 times more effective at reducing extreme poverty in sub-Saharan Africa than investments in other sectors. 11 times, that's quite incredible. Okay, so this system diagram highlights the evidence for human well-being benefits of implementing the group of solutions focused on improving agriculture and agroforestry. Okay, we're zooming in on that first graph I showed. On the left, the green bubbles are agriculture and agroforestry climate solutions. And then on the right, in blue, we show how implementing these solutions can boost various dimensions of well-being, either directly, indirectly, or through ripple effects. So a co-benefit is direct, shown by thick gray lines, if there is an explicit link between the climate solution and the human well-being dimension. A co-benefit is indirect, shown by the thin gray lines, when a direct co-benefit enables other co-benefits. And then direct and indirect co-benefits of climate solutions can also lead to other cascading positive effects on other dimensions of human well-being. We classified these as ripple effects. So just reading through the chart here, agriculture and agroforestry related climate solutions have co-benefits around income and work, water and sanitation, and food. And indirect co-benefits around networks, education, energy, housing, health, and gender equality. So for instance, solutions like sustainable intensification for smallholders and multi-strata agroforestry can lead to higher yields and thus boost food security and/or increase income, which then provides a buffer against extreme climate events. Increase in household income can then be used to purchase cleaner energy that can further help in reducing food spoilage due to poor storage, or a mobile phone that can help improve access to better markets. So food security and increase in income can then contribute to better health and gender equality. Better health and improved gender equality can in turn lead to ripple effects, such as improvements in social equity and peace and justice, which has long-term benefits both for the communities and the countries. Okay, so our review provides solid and substantial evidence that these 28 climate solutions generate significant direct and indirect co-benefits for human well-being, particularly around income and work, health, food security, education, gender equality, and energy. And they would be absolutely transformational in helping to alleviate poverty and increase resilience to current and future climate change. So once again, there don't have to be trade-offs between improving human well-being and climate action. And we really hope that this message carries forward in your reporting, especially as we hear high-level officials discussing this very topic. Your reporting, as you know, can help elevate both locally led solutions. I know a lot of you are doing this already. I'm fascinated by your work. And it can also elevate the global data to demonstrate that there don't have to be trade-offs. So we are eager for the report to be used by you and your colleagues to help shift the narrative in this critical moment towards sharing climate solutions that generate clear, substantial outcomes for human well-being. Okay, once again, I really want to thank you so much for taking time to be here today. We know your time is extremely valuable. We really encourage you to please download and share the report, 2-page fact sheet and video. You can find them on the Drawdown Lift webpage. My colleagues may have shared them in the chat as well. I can't see just yet, but we really encourage you to share them. And I can stop here and we can open it up for questions.
So great. Thank you, Dan. I think it's really, really important to have these this kind of research that helps us focus and you know, and sort out what is a very complicated issue. So I'd like to invite your questions now and you can use the Q&A button. And I'd like to first have the Project Drawdown team to come on screen and introduce yourselves. And they'll be helping respond to your questions. So should we start with Kristen?
Sure. Thanks, Debbie, and thanks, Dan, for the presentation. And welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see people from so many countries, especially across Central and Eastern and Southern Africa and India. So it looks like we have people from about a dozen different countries this afternoon, your time, this evening, if you're in India. So thank you for joining us. And I am the director of the Drawdown Lift program and happy to answer your questions that you have. So please feel free to drop those in the Q&A box and we will answer those shortly. Thanks. Yusuf?
Thanks, Kristen, and thank Dan. My name is Yusuf, and I led this report. And right now, I'm the associate scientist in the science team at Project Drawdown. To you, Paul.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending. I'm Paul, and I'm our senior scientist with a focus on agriculture and ecosystems at Project Drawdown. And Mary, over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Mary Hoff, and I'm a member of the communications team with Project Drawdown.
So I think that's everyone from Project Drawdown. Thank you very much. So yeah, we're eager to hear from you and your questions. So please type them in. Let's see, what do we have? Kavita from India, how do we address inequality? In India, women are the worst affected by climate change. So who on the team can answer that?
Sure. Thanks, Debbie. And thanks, Kavita, for the question. Yes, that's what we've seen in a lot of our research as well. And I would say that one of the foundational solutions that is included in the report is education and health and access to voluntary contraception. Access to education and health are not in themselves climate solutions, but as you know, the impacts that providing high quality universal education and access to voluntary contraception has on women and girls across their whole life course is very positive. And so one of the ways to address inequality is to just ensure that all people have access to universal education and high quality healthcare. And so that is one of the sections that we include in the report. We have a whole section on fostering equality. So I encourage you to look at that a little bit more. And Yusuf, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think that's a great answer, Kristen, and really it's multiple things. So education, access to good health, access to electricity, energy poverty, we have seen is a huge issue when it comes to addressing inequality, and a report showed that, people who lack energy also lack access to good health, good education, good standards of living. So really we need to address all of this in tandem. So we need to improve access to education, we need to improve access to good health and definitely energy. And all this together when combined will actually lead to address the systemic inequality that we have seen not only in India, but pretty much across a lot of low and middle income countries.
There's a question here, thank you, from Nigeria, saying that, we experience a high rate of negative effects of climate change, flood, low electricity supply and everything. And how can we address that? Yeah, I think for me, I would say that the message is very important, to get it out locally, as well as, all the development actors working in Nigeria, and to get that message out in the media that, we don't have to choose climate change efforts over development efforts, that there are these solutions that we can focus on that do both. And so that kind of, message is really important to get out there to get support for these kinds of efforts. So that, that both can be done at the same time. I think as some donors will say, oh, well, we don't focus on climate change, we're just focusing on development. And some donors will say we focus only on development, not on climate change. And so there's a silo there sometimes. Let's see, there's a few questions about sustainable cooking. And one is, the issue of behavior change, as well as affordability. And I don't know who would like to address that.
Yeah, I can take the first question that came from Mutayoba from Tanzania, where he talks about farmers losing their vanilla. And really, food waste is a huge problem, not only for farmers because they lose their income and all their work, but it's also contributes tremendously to climate change. And in terms of addressing that issue, the most important thing is we need to reduce food waste. We need to reduce the vanilla that's lost. How can we do that? By providing, again, I'm not a vanilla expert, but we need ways to save it, to sell it at a later time, and maybe that opportunity is not available to the farmers. So really, we need to develop that infrastructure, mostly done by governments and private players, where farmers can actually store their produce to be sold at a later time. And that's what's needed in a lot of different countries, not only for vanilla, but for wheat, but for rice, and a lot of different grains and produce that we are doing. And this will not only improve, again, the income of the family, the farmers, the food security of the country, but would also contribute tremendously in addressing climate change. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Yeah.
There's a question about how livestock contribute to climate change and how to mitigate it. Does someone want to answer that one? Livestock raising.
I'll answer that one.
Yeah.
Yes, with as far as livestock, in general, it's because when a cow or a goat or a sheep is eating either feed or grass out on the rangeland, as it eats it and digests it in its stomach, and then it burps out methane, which has a very large impact on climate change. And most of that impact, it happens inside of a decade. And as far as addressing it, some of the big ways certainly is reducing or eliminating food waste of meat, and so that all that is produced is used. And then certainly impact our diets affect the demand for a lot of beef. However, in a lot of areas in low and middle income countries, there is such a small amount of beef that is eaten that a shift in diet isn't necessarily always a healthy activity if people are already eating only a small amount.
Okay, thank you, Paul. There's a question about how do we ensure a just transition to achieve climate goals?
I can take that one. I mean, you know, one thing that's critical is recognizing that, which Project Drawdown acknowledges, is that, you know, it's high income countries that have, you know, been the source of most of the fossil fuels in the atmosphere and most of the climate change that we are all experiencing. And so, you know, recognizing that, ensuring that high income countries are continuing to drastically reduce their emissions and switch to renewable energy as soon as possible is absolutely critical, because that is where the onus falls. And then, you know, ensuring that we do kind of all three pathways in terms of addressing climate change moving forward. So, you know, the first pathway is thinking about reducing emissions in terms of climate mitigation. The second pathway is adaptation, ensuring that communities who are most affected by climate change have the resources to adapt, whether it's their crops, their livelihoods, you know, the locations of health clinics, so helping people adapt to climate change. And the third pathway that really opened up, thankfully, at COP27 is the loss and damage pathway. And I think that is key when we think about an equitable transition, is ensuring that communities that are heavily impacted by climate-driven disasters, such as what happened in Pakistan last fall, or the, you know, the droughts that are occurring in northern Kenya right now, or in southern Madagascar, ensuring that there is a loss and damage facility that those communities can access. So those are the three pathways that I would highlight for a just transition.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Let's see. Someone's asking, is there a specific solution to climate change that has a positive impact, or it's all, let's see, I'm not sure, or it's always basically negative effects? I'm not sure what the question is.
I mean, I think I would suggest just looking at the report. So we have 28 solutions that we highlight in the report. And a lot of the solutions in the report are what we call triple duty solutions, because they help with mitigation, so reducing emissions, they help with adaptation, or adapting to the effects of climate change. And then they also help with boosting aspects of human well-being, which are important, especially to people who live in rural areas in low and middle income countries, because, you know, we all are really eager to help achieve the SDGs. And so the 28 climate solutions that we highlight in the report really, you know, do all three things, you know, mitigation, adaptation, and helping advance different dimensions of human well-being.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like.
Yeah, if I could, I'll just I'll add to that is while a lot of agricultural activities are a win-win for our climate and food security and income, when what is happening more and more is there are investments from other countries that are buying land in low and middle income countries. And even if those activities on the land are climate friendly, if most of what is grown is not food and is bringing income to local people, I think there is an example of where a climate solution is not also a benefit for the local communities.
Thank you, Paul. We'd like to circle back to the question of sustainable cooking and alternative. Someone was saying that in India, they've been moving away from food wood and coal cooking. But that's a behavioral change that most people, is there something, how you do address that in the report in terms of behavioral change required, and also the affordability issue?
Yusuf, do you want to take that one? We do have a whole section in the report on clean cooking. I definitely suggest.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would take that question from Pavanjot and also from Purnima. And I think when it comes to clean cooking, I think all the people working in that field have realized that it's way more complex than it has been initially thought. Whether it's a stacking, where people use multiple different cooking fuels, whether it's lack of capital to afford LPG or clean fuels, or are really having a behavior where people prefer doing what they have been doing through generations, right? So it's a very challenging issue to be addressed, right? We all know that clean cooking fuel is good for health, it's good for air quality, it's good for gender equality, it's good for climate change, yet we have not yet reached the desired goals. And again, all these factors come into play. Combining the questions again from Pavanjot and Purnima, I think there are multiple things that could be done. First and foremost is to address that behavioral change. We need that group. We need ground-based work where the benefits of clean cooking are clearly laid out to families. Oftentimes, families are not aware of how much damage an unclean cooking fuel causes them. For example, the health problem they face is, the lack of opportunity to go to school. When we highlight, when we really showcase, what benefits you have from using clean cooking fuel, it really gives them motivation to switch from an unclean fuel to a clean fuel. But the question then comes, like, can people afford clean cooking fuel, especially in terms of LPG, which is very expensive for a lot of families? And to answer that, there has to be a way to support it for low income houses, where they're provided some sort of incentive to buy government subsidies. And without that, it's almost very challenging for people living less than $2 a day to buy those clean fuel. And again, there are multiple ways to do. I know in India, a green bond was recently issued by the government. I forgot the exact amount, but it was a big number. Those bonds could be used to fund these projects. That's where the real benefit of using those money lies, where you use the money to fund solutions, to fund even that benefits people, that benefits climate, that benefits the country. And I think that's where the answer lies. So multiple prongs, you have to apply ground level work to encourage the usage of clean fuel. Then you provide incentives, tax breaks, to really help people to take these solutions. And again, it's very challenging, and each country has its own dynamics when it comes to clean cooking adoption. But at a higher level, this is what needs to be done for a widespread adoption of clean cooking fuels.
Thank you, Yusuf. Again, there's links that have been shared, so you can refer to those resources. And we are running out of time, so I would like to, I think that's all for the questions, but the last question, I would like to end with what someone said just now, and they are saying that, how do we support local and African journalists to be aware that climate change is a key issue that needs to be addressed from all angles? In Lesotho, the majority of citizens are not fully aware of climate change and its impact on their daily lives. So and yes, I think that's exactly why we're having this kind of briefing session, and Project Drawdown Lift's work is to really do this important research on the specific solutions that are able to tackle both development and climate change, and make that available to people and journalists like yourself. So I'd like to encourage you to incorporate this knowledge, the solutions-oriented data that Lift provides, into your reporting, so that you can support local efforts to and communities on the ground, and to keep your readers engaged by showing the solution side of the climate story, and not just the doom and the gloom. And I think each one of us has a really important role to play. So thank you so much again. I think we're out of time. I really appreciate your participation today, and for joining us. And just a quick reminder to please fill out the survey for the team afterwards. So I just want to say thank you to the team, to Dan, and to all of you for attending this briefing today. Thank you so much.